few people would say that they want to be led by a command and control leader, yet we see them everywhere. And some say they don't want to be one, but the question is, what is my option? Today, we will give you language and ideas for that other option with the help of a multi-time best-selling author. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively, make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast, you could be with us live for future episodes like I am right now. And you can do that by joining us on your favorite social channel. And the way to do that is to get connected with one of our groups so that you can find all that out. You can do that on our Facebook group or our LinkedIn group, although you don't have to only watch in those locations. But you can learn more by joining those groups at either remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn. Hope you will do those things. Today's episode is brought to you by our Remarkable Master Classes, picked from 13 important life and leadership skills to help you become more effective, productive, and confident while overcoming some of a leader's toughest challenges. Learn more and sign up at remarkablemasters.com. Our guest today is Stephen M.R. Covey. I'm going to bring him in. Then let me introduce him. I see some comments have come in. I'll get those up in a second. Let me introduce him to you. He's probably one of the people that's here that you've heard of before. Maybe he doesn't need any introduction. I'm going to give you one anyway. Stephen M.R. Covey is the New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling author of The Speed of Trust, a phenomenal book, which has been translated into 26 languages and sold over 2 million copies worldwide. He's also the author of another bestseller, Trust and Inspire, how truly great leaders inspire greatness in others. And that's what we're talking about today. He brings to his writings the perspective of a practitioner, as he is a former president and CEO of the Covey Leadership Center, where he increased shareholder value 67 times and grew the company to become the largest leadership development firm in the world. A Harvard MBA, he co-founded and currently leads Franklin Covey's Global Speed of Trust practice. He serves on numerous boards, including the Government Leadership Advisory Council, and he's been recognized with the Lifetime Achievement Award for Top Thought Leaders in Trust from Trust Across America, Trust Around the World. And I'm going to tell you right now that if you're watching the podcast, listening to the podcast, and you respond to me by the end of February 2024, you'll have a chance to win this copy of this new book, hardcover copy, not the one that I worked from, but one that I'm going to send to someone. The way you get entered, and you can do that whether you're watching this live now or listening to the podcast, is to send me a note on LinkedIn and say, Kevin, enter me in the drawing for a copy of Trust and Inspire. I hope you'll do that. Going to my LinkedIn, you see my name. That's how you find me on LinkedIn. Go ahead and do that. So without any further ado, Stephen, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much, Kevin. I'm really excited to be with you and with all of our guests today to have this conversation. So thank you for inviting me to be part of this.
All right. We've got Boston and New Hampshire and Texas and who knows who else. Let's see what else we got here. This topic couldn't come at a better time. That's a good way to lead us in, Daniel. Thank you for reading my notes. So Stephen, I want to talk about why this book, but before we get there, just really quickly, we all knew who your dad was. That's a part of your life, I know, but tell us a little bit about your journey, how you end up doing this work, and specifically how your work ends up being focused around trust.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you. Yes. Well, so I am the son of Dr. Stephen R. Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits. And let me just say this, if I could, up front about my father, because a lot of people have read that book and been influenced by the book or by him. And what I would say this, that as good as my father was in public, as a speaker, as an author, and he was very good.
He was very good.
As good as he was in public, he was even better in private. As a husband to my mother, as a father to us kids. He was the real deal. He was who you thought he was. And that's maybe the kindest and most accurate tribute I can give to him, is that as good as he was in public, he was even better in private. And so I feel very blessed and grateful to have been raised by him and by my mother, and so that's part of my journey is having mentors like that, and what a blessing that was for me. And so my path took me. How I ended up getting into trust is that I became the CEO of the Covey Leadership Center, and we went all around the world. Then we did a merger with our arch competitor at the
Yeah.
time. At the time, Franklin Quest, to form Franklin Covey, and these were great people with coming from both companies, great values and everything, but we'd been competitors, and so we were kind of had different views of the world, and now we're together, and there's low trust. Not so much that we'd done things to each other, but we just saw the world differently. We'd been competing for years. Suddenly there was low trust, and I saw how with this low trust, everything slowed down. Everything costs more. Everything got interpreted and politicized and the like. And suddenly we were not as creative and as collaborative. We became internally focused. And I began to see firsthand and witness the high cost of low trust. And the value of the merger was not going to achieve what it was capable of achieving if that stayed that way. So we began to become intentional and deliberate about saying, you know what? We can't just assume trust. We have to work on building it
Yeah.
explicitly, intentionally, on purpose with each other. And we began to do that. And when we began to behave our way into greater trust, the trust did in fact grow. And once we increased the trust, and suddenly our collaboration went up dramatically, our creativity, our innovation, we could move fast. We were far more value adding to clients and customers. Everything changed. And I kind of came away from that whole experience just with some observations, having witnessed kind of the high cost of low trust and the great returns and benefits, the dividends of high trust. And I came away saying, trust matters. And we all know that, but I think we're underestimating how much it matters by a factor of 10, maybe by a factor of 100. Trust matters. Trust is learnable. You can move the needle on trust. You can build it intentionally. And there's nothing more high leverage that we can do today. And I looked around and I felt like most of the stuff on trust was either too soft, kind of like trust everyone, or too academic and not practical and tangible enough. And suddenly I felt like, this is what I want to say. I found my voice because I was a little reluctant to follow in my father's footsteps
Not
as
just
an
your
author
father's
and speak.
footsteps, but your father's name, for heaven's sakes.
I've got his name, and no matter what I write, it's not going to be the 7 habits. It's just the reality. And so I was a little reluctant, but once I found my voice around trust, that this is a big idea that we can get so much better at, then suddenly the fear dissipated, and I felt emboldened and really inspired to proceed down that path. So I wrote The Speed of Trust, which is really reflecting these learnings and insights, and then Smart Trust, and now this new book, Trust and Inspire, which is a leadership book. So that's kind of my journey. And it came about from my own crucible of being in the middle of this merger and experiencing firsthand the high cost of low trust, but then turning it around and seeing the great return of high trust and saying, wow, what if we could get really good at this on purpose? That was the
Yeah.
idea.
And I love that. And when I introduced you, I said you come at your writing from the perspective of a practitioner, which is exactly what you've just said again. And I think that's why one of the reasons why Speed of Trust resonated so well, and why I believe this new book, also a bestseller, Trust and Inspire, is so valuable, is because it comes at it from a very practical perspective. Although it does help us lift our eyes to see something that perhaps we aren't thinking about, or thinking about in the best way. And I opened by using this phrase, command and control. And it's one of the pieces of this book, right? Like,
Yeah.
we've been leading by some version of command and control, at least not everyone, but societally, by this model for a very long time. And so let's start there before we offer the alternative, by saying, what do you mean when you say that? I want to make sure we're all on the same
Yeah.
page before we go on.
Yeah. It's just kind of the more traditional style of leadership, the more top down, hierarchical, kind of what we've grown up with. And I'm just kind of putting it into those three words, command and control, to capture it. But I'm acknowledging that we've made a lot of progress within that command and control paradigm. And, there was the authoritarian command and control kind of flown out of the industrial age. That's the real focus on efficiency and scientific management and all these things. And that was helpful in its time, but there was not enough focus on people. So we began to be focused more on people and added things like emotional intelligence and strengths and mission and trustworthiness. And that was all really good. And the problem is for most, we didn't shift the paradigm, the mindset of how we view people, how we view leadership. So it just became a more enlightened command and control, which is a far better version of it, right?
For sure.
I
But
mean,
part of what you're suggesting here, and I think the first piece of big value is to give us the alternative, like more than just sort of, and you use this idea in the book of a continuum, like instead of just sort of moving in a direction, which is what you've just described, you're saying if command and control is on this end, we got to describe what's on the other end. So the title sort of gives it away, but what's the alternative then? The true alternative, not just the incremental improvement, but what's the true alternative to command and control?
it's trust and inspire. Again, three words. I'm trying to draw a parallel: command and control, trust and inspire. And that starts from the premise of partnership and is moving into the whole realm of inspiration as opposed to motivation. Command and control tends to be motivation, external, extrinsic. So heavy carrot and stick motivation, rewards. Nothing wrong with it, just incomplete and just insufficient. Whereas inspiration is internal, intrinsic. It's inside of people. We're trying to light the fire within. And that fire, once lit, can burn on for months, if not years, without the need for constant external stimuli. So,
Correct.
yes, I believe that the future of leadership is moving from some form of command and control, even the enlightened version of it, to trust and inspire, which I
Well,
believe is different in kind, not just different in degree. You move within the paradigm of command and control, and enlightened is different in degree, much better version. But we need to kind of cross the chasm, if you will, take the leap into something that's different in kind, trust and inspire, which really views people as whole people with greatness inside of them. And that our job as a leader is not to try to control them, but to unleash them and see their potential and their talent and so forth.
yeah, I love that idea. The idea of unleashing potential, which we can't unleash potential if we
See it?
don't see it, and people can't unleash it if they don't see it. And so I was going to go there later, but you just sort of led us there. So underneath of this alternative of trust and inspire are some beliefs, and and I and you hinted at a couple of them, and I'm gonna give you the chance to just sort of lay them out.
Yeah.
I'll put them across the screen, and then we'll talk about them a little bit. So here we go. The
Yeah.
five beliefs that you think are needed, or we could call them beliefs, we can call them mindsets that we need in order to really make this shift. Right. So what are they?
Absolutely. It starts with this mindset, these beliefs. Collectively, this comprises a paradigm. And a paradigm comes from the Greek, right? The paradigma, which means a mental map or model. So it's trying to be a map that describes the territory. But you could have an inaccurate map. Think of the early cartographers and their maps of the world that, they kind of got parts of it, but it's incomplete, inaccurate map. So we've often operated with an incomplete or inaccurate map of people and of leadership. These five fundamental beliefs collectively comprise a more complete, more accurate map of both people and of leadership. So here's what they are. First, I believe that people have greatness inside of them. I know this is one of the things that you talk about and write about, Kevin. The people have greatness inside of them. So if I buy that belief, my job as a leader is to unleash their potential, not to control them.
And right, and if I believe that, I don't need to command them. I can trust
I can
them.
trust them because they have greatness inside them. I start by trying to see the greatness because like it was Emerson who said, no, Thoreau, it's not what you look at that matters. It's what you see. Do you see the greatness in people? And such that you can then communicate the greatness to them so that they come to see it in themselves. Then
And
you develop it. Then you unleash it.
and the
You can
and
trust them.
the alternative is if we don't see it, we won't we won't lead people toward it, right? And if we don't see it, then the whole idea of trust and inspire rings hollow, because how can we trust them if we don't see the greatness in them? So the second of the five is, I
I
love this, by the way.
Yes, wonderful. I believe that people are whole people, meaning body, heart, mind, spirit. So if I buy that belief, then my job as a leader is to inspire, not merely motivate. Now, look, if people were just economic beings only, just the body, then motivation would be sufficient. Just pay them. That's enough. But in addition to a body, so they want to be paid. That's appropriate. You need to do it. But they also have a heart. So they want to connect and to care and to belong. They have a mind. So they want to grow and develop and improve. And they have a spirit. So they want to contribute and make a difference and matter and have significance. So inspiring can take you to a whole different place beyond mere motivating only, because they're whole people and they bring their whole selves to work. So look, that's how I view people, as whole people with greatness inside of them. See, that's a more complete and expansive view, and I believe accurate view of people, than a more limited view that says, hey, maybe a few people have greatness inside of them. They're called high potentials, but nobody else does, or very few do. So I got to control everybody else. And others might say, you know what, at the end of the day, people are just economic beings, so just pay them. It's all about pay. No, that's a factor, but they have
It's
so
just not
much
the
more.
whole
It's not the
picture.
whole,
It's not the whole map, right?
exactly. So that's a more complete view of people, whole people with greatness inside of them. Everyone.
Belief
That's how I
number
view
three.
people. The next three are how I view leadership. So number three, I believe that there is enough for everyone. That's an abundance mentality as opposed to a scarcity mentality. So if I buy that belief, then my job as a leader is to elevate caring above competing. Yes, let's compete in the marketplace, but let us care and collaborate in the workplace. But oftentimes, rather than abundance, people are scripted with scarcity. They have to compete with each other inside the workforce itself. But it flows out of a scarcity mindset. See, I think this scarcity might be good economic theory, but I believe that scarcity is lousy leadership theory, because I think there's an abundance of everything that is good that we're seeking, of respect, of empathy, of compassion, of commitment, of creativity, of innovation, of trust, of inspiration. An
And if you
abundance of
take
this.
all that list of things you just said, we would all agree that the more caring there is, the more caring there will be. And the more trust there is, the more trust there will be. And the more innovation there is, the more innovation there will be. So, like, by definition, we know this if we stop and really think about it. But if we look at the world like someone's going to win and someone's going to lose, like on the football field,
Yep.
much as we might enjoy watching that, or in my case, basketball, the reality is that isn't the way the world is if we see the world this way. So the second of the three beliefs about leadership is what?
I believe that leadership is stewardship, meaning it's about responsibility, not rights, influence, not position. So if I buy that belief, then my job as a leader is to put service above self-interest. And here's the irony, Kevin. In the process of doing so, self-interest is usually served. But I put service above self-interest. Why? Because I'm a steward. And so I believe that this idea that we are stewards as leaders, and that leadership is about stewardship, responsibility, that's implicit, inherent with being a leader, as opposed to rights that come with being a leader. So I see myself as a steward, and I have a stewardship for those that I am serving. And then finally, the fifth one, I believe that enduring influence is created from the inside out. So if I buy that belief, then my job as a leader is to go first. Someone needs to go first. Leaders go first. So if they want more respect, they're the first to demonstrate and show the respect. They want more openness, more transparency, vulnerability. They're the first to be open, transparent, and vulnerable. They go first. They want more trust. They're the first to give trust.
If they want the group to, if they want the organization to be more positive, they've got to go. We could go right on down the
Go
list, right?
on. They go first. They work inside out, meaning they always look in the mirror. They start with themselves versus outside in, which is pointing the finger. As soon as they change, he changes, she changes, then we can do this. As soon as the CEO changes, the board, the market, those are all factors. They're all real. But outside in is not how, that's how we diagnose, but how we change, develop, and transform is always inside out. And it's certainly true for us as leaders. So those 5 fundamental beliefs collectively comprise a more accurate, a more complete, a more relevant, and expansive paradigm of people and of leadership. And until you shift the paradigm, you're still in incremental improvement within a flawed, limited paradigm, of command and control, of some version of it. But this is a more expansive paradigm of trust and inspire, viewing people in a whole different and kind way. It's a sea change.
It's a sea change. And I really wanted to focus on the beliefs, and I'm going to ask a couple more questions here before we start to wrap up, because the value in this book, Trust and Inspire, starts with those beliefs. And
Okay.
so if you're listening or watching and you're nodding, if you're saying, yeah, I'm with you on that, or maybe I don't always live it, but I believe those things, then the book gives you the roadmap on what to do, but it has to start with those beliefs. And that's why I wanted to lead with the beliefs, because that sets the table. Ultimately, if you don't buy those beliefs that Stephen just shared, this book is going to be of limited value to you. Agreed?
Yes. But
That's not what you wanted me to say. I
no,
know.
here, yeah, ultimately, it does saying that this is a more complete and relevant and expansive way of looking at people in a leadership. And but here's what I would say is that, if I could paraphrase my friend Marshall Goldsmith, what got us here won't get us there. So the kind of leadership that might have got us to where we are today, might have been a version of command and control, is not going to be the kind of leadership that's going to need to take us to where we need to go tomorrow, with all the change and disruption going on with these younger generations and Gen Z and this upcoming alpha generation with completely different expectations, with work from home, hybrid, remote options that didn't exist a few years ago. With all these choices, we've got to lead in a new way. A new world of work requires a new way to lead. So we need to shift to stay relevant, because the old command and control model, even the enlightened version, is becoming increasingly less and less relevant. So hopefully that, if maybe someone could buy that, then they could say, so let me take a look at these beliefs.
Exactly.
Yeah. But here's
So
what I would say this on the beliefs, like, my guess is most of your viewers and listeners, because of the nature of this, this is the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. So you're talking about remarkable leadership, which I think is trust and inspire leadership.
agreed.
So the listeners are kind of attuned to this, and they're hearing this from you and from your guests. And so my guess is most people would say, I buy those beliefs. But here's what happens sometimes. Sometimes our style can get in the way of our intent. So we might buy the belief, but sometimes when the pressure's on, it's very easy for our style to get in the way of our intent. We got to close the quarter strong. The pressure's on. Got to get the results, get the numbers, and suddenly we move into command and control because it's our native tongue. We know it. We're good at it. It's what we're raised in, and the pressure's on. We revert to it. If I'm learning a new language and practicing the language every day, but then I take a hammer and I miss the nail and I hit my thumb, I'm going to cuss out in my native tongue,
Yeah,
not
you're
the
not
new
gonna
language I'm
you're
learning.
gonna cuss out in Korean, right? Or whatever.
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
That's an excellent
because
example, by the
the
way.
stress is on. And oftentimes our style gets in the way of our intent. On a personal note on
Love
this,
that.
I learned this from my kids later, um, where my style gets in the way of my intent. We go on a family vacation. I got 5 kids. I got all these kids running around and suddenly I get nervous around airports because I know everything that can go wrong and you got to be there on time. The plane's going to leave with or without you. And so we go to the airport and here I believe in the greatness of my children, that they're capable, responsible, but you wouldn't know it to watch me at an airport because suddenly we go there and I turn into this command and control dad that's just barking out orders. No, 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 no one's going to go eat. You're going to stay here at the gate and you can't go shopping. And I'm just controlling their every move. What I learned later, Kevin, is that my kids came up with a nickname for this. And they would say, "Hey, everyone, dad's got airport face." And airport face means I'm all freaked out. I'm just barking out orders and commands to everyone. And here we are going on vacation and nobody is having any fun. but my style is getting in the way of my intent. My intent is I do believe in my kids, but the pressure's on and I revert to this
Yeah.
heavy-handed style.
We
And
can't have a
and
home alone moment, right? Uh,
yeah,
so so you know, you hinted at this. You went back to say you answered part of the question of why is this so important now? And you talked about and in the book you talk about 5 factors. You talk and you but you hinted at them, and the first 4 of them, I think pretty much everyone would say, yeah, 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 yeah. Right. The world's changing, the work's changing, the workplace is changing, the nature of the workforce is changing. But the last one of those 5 is the one I want you to say a little bit more about because it fascinated me and it illuminated to me in a new way, I think, something important. And you said so the last of those sort of reasons why we have to lead differently is because of the nature of choice is changing. Say a little bit more about that because I don't think that's something people have thought about in this way.
yeah. Well, if you think about it, with all of the advances in technology and everything else, and the workplace changing, we've gone from what we might call multiple choice to infinite choice. There's just all kinds of options and possibilities. The advent of the gig economy and all these things where suddenly I can live here and work there. I have options and choices, and I can do all these different things in a way I didn't have even a few years ago. So before I might have had a number of choices. Now it's infinite for people. And so people get to choose where they want to be, who they want to work with, and why. And they're going to choose to work with people where they feel trusted, where they feel inspired. And if they feel like they're just being commanded and controlled, they'll go find a place where they feel trusted and where because they have choices and options in a way they didn't have before. I like to put it this way: people don't want to be managed. People want to be led. They want to be trusted and inspired. And when they're just being managed and being commanded and controlled, they have too many choices and options today to stay there forever. They'll just say, "You know what? I don't need this. I can go elsewhere." And they will. And we won't retain talent, especially the best talent. And we won't bring out the best in talent if we try to command and control our way. So it's got to be a new way to lead, trust and inspire.
I love that. So as we start to wrap up, I want to remind you all that you are listening to my conversation with Stephen M.R. Covey, the author of a number of books, including the newest, Trust and Inspire. It's been the focus of this conversation. If you missed it earlier, if before now, between now and the end of February 2024, you send me a LinkedIn note and say, I want a copy of the book, you'll be entered in a drawing to win a copy of this book. Hope you'll do that and connect with me on LinkedIn while you're there. Stephen, a couple of things before we go. I'm going to shift you and I know, like we were chatting before we went live and I suddenly realized it was time to go live. Like I know you and I could have a very long conversation. We could go a long way, but I want to get to a couple of things that maybe you don't always get asked before we finish. And one of those is, other than maybe not at the airport, but maybe after you leave the airport, but like, what do you do for fun?
Well, I love to go to sporting events as well as cultural events. So I love, I have a son right now, Kevin, that plays in the NFL for the Philadelphia Eagles. So I go to a lot of pro football games, which is fun. So I love sporting events, but I also love cultural events. I love to go to plays on Broadway and the West End in London, and I love to go to concerts. So that's fun for me. Kind of events, cultural events, sporting events, and concerts, things like that. That's I find fun, and I love to do it with my family and with my wife, with my children. I started with when I was. This was clear back in 2007. I took my young 7-year-old daughter to Taylor Swift in 2007, and I was a Swiftie before there were Swifties.
Before there were Swifties, 2007. She was a
And I'd
youngster.
taken her to 3 Taylor Swift concerts, so now here, this huge thing going on today, and I feel like I was there before this was so big, so things like that. I try to do it with my children. My kids are my hobbies in a sense, and just love to spend time with my family. But doing activities, doing events are fun for me.
Love that. One of the things I know we have in common is that we're both readers. And it's the only thing you knew I was going to ask you. But what are you reading, Stephen, these days? Or what's something you've read recently?
Yeah. Well, I really love some of the works of Francis Fry and Ann Morris, and their earlier book Unleashed is terrific. They have a brand new book out called "Move Fast and Fix Things," and Francis invited me to endorse it, which I did. I really love the book, and the whole premise is bringing speed back into the equation. That sometimes speed can get a bad name, because you can move fast and break things. And their whole point is, no, let's rethink speed, move fast and fix things simultaneously. And for me, that resonates because my whole thing is on the speed of trust. And so I really believe that once you build this trust, you move fast. And when you fix things as well, then you have a greater impact. So that's a great new book that's out by Ann Morris and Francis Fry.
We will have that in the show notes as always. And Daniel on LinkedIn says the Speed of Trust was a workshop during his master's program at the University of Texas in Dallas. He loves the book. He uses it in his practice in Brazil. So that's probably a good place to take us now, Stephen. Where do you want to point people? Where do you want to send people? How do you want to connect with people? What do you want them to know before we wrap up? And for those who are watching, I'll hold the book up while you do that.
Well, thank you. I would say this, that go to trustandinspire.com. Trustandinspire.com. The name of the book. We have a website there with a variety of tools and things you can do, and including how to connect with me via social media on X, on Instagram and LinkedIn and the like, Facebook. So a variety of ways you can connect that way, and some different tools. And I think that, again, we hit today the fundamental beliefs, which I'm really glad that we did, Kevin, because it's easy to kind of skip the basic paradigm and kind of move right into the stewardships, but those beliefs matter enormously. And so I'll just give one little quick illustration, if I could, of a great example of Trust and Inspire in action, of adopting beliefs like this, and then doing the stewardships that follow the stewardships to model, to trust, and to inspire, which is all part of the Trust and Inspire approach. But I think of what Satya Nadella has done at Microsoft, along with Kathleen Hogan, who's the head of Chief People Officer, Chief Human Resource Officer, a brilliant leader as well, and how they came in and through a different approach of leadership. And they started with a growth mindset for everyone. This idea there's greatness inside of people, a growth mindset for everyone. And this idea of seeing that and then trying to unleash it. And in their words, it was a model, coach, care approach, which is really modeling, trusting, inspiring. And through this process, at the time when Nadella came in, the culture had become cutthroat competitive internally. They were losing talent. They were not innovating anymore. They still were Microsoft, still big. But he came in, and through his leadership style, his and Kathleen's, literally revitalized the culture. He modeled, he trusted, he inspired. Kathleen modeled, trusted, and inspired. And they began to win in the workplace, built a high trust culture that inspires, and they're focused on thriving today. They began to win in the marketplace through collaboration and innovation. They're a cloud powerhouse, completely reinvented themselves. And today they're one of only 2 companies in the world valued at over $2 trillion. They've unleashed the greatness of the organization by first unleashing the greatness of their own people. And that's the sequence matters. The way that we sustain winning in the marketplace with customers and partners is because we first win in the workplace with our own people and trust and inspire this kind of leadership. It starts with those beliefs, but then where you model, you trust, and you inspire, that will be what unleashes the greatness, the talent that's inside of people. We need this in our world today. We need it not only in our organizations, we need it in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our society at large.
Yes, we do.
And we can become trust and inspire leaders to be a model for all the world.
You came here to learn how to unleash greatness in others. And we've talked about beliefs, we've talked about approaches, we've talked about ideas. And now I leave all of you with a question. It's the question I ask you every single episode. The question is, now what? Okay, now what are you going to do with what you've just learned? There's plenty here to think about. There's plenty of here to consider. And obviously, both of us would hope that you'd buy a copy of Trust and Inspire. But beyond that, what ideas did you take from this that you will act on? Having an idea, being inspired is wonderful. Taking action on the inspiration is what will start to make a difference. I hope that you will think about that and use this as more than just a useful way to spend your time on the treadmill or your drive to work, but rather to think about how can this conversation and the outcomes that you choose change your work, change your results, change your organization. Stephen, thanks so much for being here. It was such a pleasure to be with you. I've been looking forward to this. We finally got the chance to do it. Thank you.
You are welcome, Kevin. Thank you. Love being part of this remarkable leadership podcast. And my response to that, go first.
I love that.
Leaders go first.
Leaders go first. And so if this is not your first time listening, how you can go first is you can go write a review of this podcast. You can invite someone else to join you in listening to the one we just listened to, or listen with us next week for the next episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.